Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Faith and Recovery Live. My name is Brian, as some of you know, and I am a biblical counselor at Waypoint Life, Center for Renewal and Growth. And I also have a website called faithandrecovery.net where I try to offer information to people that are trying to learn about either faith or recovery or how those two work together. Those are the two places you can typically find. You can find all these videos on that faithandrecovery.net website. I've got them all uploaded there if you want to look at past ones. And you don't feel like flipping through Facebook. I'm going to wait around here a second and see if somebody wants to log on and join us here this evening. I know because it's Wednesday, it's a little bit more difficult. People are still in the middle of their work week, and I respect that. It's just my schedule has changed a little bit, so this is pretty much the only time I have that I can do this. And I didn't want to stop because I really enjoy sharing with you all. So, like I mentioned earlier, the topic this evening is gray areas. Gray areas in our faith, gray areas in our recoveries. And I was actually not sure what I was going to talk about tonight leading up to it. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine that caused me to stop and do some thinking. And sometimes when I'm working through things myself is how they wind up here in the Faith and Recovery Live sessions. So we were discussing a certain topic, and I was sharing my viewpoint on it. And there was a small portion of the topic that I could say, okay, this is right or wrong based on my Christian faith. But there was a large portion of it that I had to say, this is the position I hold, this is the direction I go. Pardon me. This is what I do or don't do, but I can't say categorically this is right or wrong for somebody else. And that got me to thinking, when we're in recovery, when we're trying to grow or at least maintain our faith, what is right or wrong, what is good or bad, what is helpful or unhelpful, healthy or unhealthy, these are things that are important to know. And there are some things that we can look at, or we can talk about, or we can engage with, that we can know that about. And we can know definitively this is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do. But there is a significant portion of our lives as people in recovery, or our lives as Christians, people of faith, where we don't get the privilege of a black and white, well marked out path that says this is the only way that it can be. This is the only right way. Now, to be honest, if you had asked me this question, man, I don't know, if you'd asked me this question 10, 15 years ago in regards to faith, I think I would have given you a different answer. I think I would have actually felt very much that faith was something clearly marked out and very clearly defined. And I think if you had asked me, I would have said the same thing about recovery. I would have said, no, this is what recovery is. This is what sobriety is. These are the definitions. And I would have felt that I could very easily tell you black and white, right or wrong, left or right, this is where it is. But as I have walked longer in my faith and walked longer in my recovery, I've come to see that there are a lot of what we would call gray areas. There are places where you don't get to have it that clear all the time. For example, let's say someone is in recovery from alcoholism, and so they don't drink alcohol anymore. They quit drinking alcohol. They haven't drank alcohol for 5 years. What do you do with candy, like chocolate liqueur? You say, well, there's no real alcohol in that. Okay, fair enough. What do you do with cooking wine? What do you do with kombucha, the drink? What do you do about these things? Technically, by definition, there may be some alcohol involved. Is it okay to do that? Is it okay to ingest that? Is it intoxication that I'm trying to avoid, or is it the actual ingestion of alcohol? Is it a certain kind of alcohol? Is it all alcohol? So you see what I'm saying there? This gets even more tricky when you have addictions to things like food or sex. So is it the actual, is it a calorie count? Is my sobriety a certain number of calories? What about a situation where I need to eat more food in order to recover from a surgery? Or, what happens if I need to change my eating habits and my sobriety has been defined by maybe going to certain meetings or something? So, in recovery for sex addiction, what does a healthy sexuality look like? It's not like I can just stop having, sexual relations with my spouse. So, there are these areas that when I first started recovery, I guess I would have felt that these were very easily defined, very easily figured out. And the longer I've been out, the more I realize that every person's situation is different, and that life itself leads us to change our positions from time to time. Now, what about faith? You say, well, our faith doesn't change, our faith stays the same. Actually, no, it doesn't. If we would honestly look at the text, let's just take a look at somebody like Abraham. When he first starts out, he's very obedient as far as following God. He leaves where he is and he goes to the land of Canaan. But he's always going down to Egypt or to the land of the Philistines or somewhere else. He won't stay in the land. Eventually he does stay in the land. He finally gets it. You look at somebody like Joseph in the Bible. We find him when he's 17 or younger. He seems to be arrogant. He seems to be willing to brag about his dreams, kind of rub his brother's nose in his dreams. And yet, a few years later, he's humble. He has a strong character. He's willing to risk his life as a slave. And he's doing it all without asking for any special favors. So you see growth. You see change. You say, well, Brian, that doesn't change what they believed. They believed the same thing. The belief stayed the same. Okay, so riddle me this. What is the most important place to worship God in the Bible? Is it the tabernacle? Is it the temple? Is it the synagogue? Is it the church? Things have changed in our faith. I remember in my own life, there was a period of time where I felt the changes happening, and it was very frustrating to me. It was very scary to me. And I remember God saying to me, Brian, I'm the one that doesn't change. The Bible does not say that you as a Christian never change. You as someone in recovery, you never change. It says, I am the Lord, I change not. God is the one that doesn't change. The rest of us, we do. And it is those changes that create these gray areas. If we stayed in a static position, if we never moved in our lives, if we never were any different from the moment we came awake to the moment we finally close our eyes and go into the next life, if we were the same person the whole time, we would have sharper lines. We would have clearer definitions. But because we move and change and grow and flex, things are different sometimes. Now, that doesn't mean that God changes his expectations of us. That doesn't mean that what it takes to stay sober changes. What it means is that how we interact with those things changes. And that creates gray areas. The Jews, God's chosen people, he gave them some laws, gave some rules to follow. What we don't realize sometimes is that it was impossible to keep them all. Not because the law that God gave them was some kind of a planned obsolescence thing like an iPhone where they quit giving it support after a few years. That's not why the law failed. The law fails because it can't flex with humanity. And so there are gray areas built in. But here's what happens. So, for example, you can't keep all the law. One law says, do not work on the Sabbath. The other law says, if you see a donkey and it's in a hole, you pull it out. Well, what if a donkey falls in a hole on the Sabbath? Do you leave it in or do you pull it out? You're going to break one of the two. That becomes a gray area. That becomes an area where someone has to make a decision. Somebody has to decide, and they have to, there's not one way that can be right. You have to choose which one you're going to keep. When I talk about gray areas in our recovery and gray areas in our faith, I'm not saying that there are areas where we can relax our desire to do right. I'm not saying there are areas where we can choose not to choose. I'm saying there are areas where the only thing that determines the course of action is our choice. Where either way we could be right and either way we could be wrong, but we're going to have to make a decision. What does this look like? Well, I just described something that's kind of hypothetical. Okay, so let me give one a little bit more concrete. Let's say that you are the one in your family that provides. Like you're the one that goes to work and pays the bills. You're the mother, the father, the grandmother, the grandfather, the daughter, whoever you are. You are the one whose paycheck feeds the family. And you have a situation where you have to choose, am I going to take a job that will feed my family and care for my family better? Or am I going to choose a job that allows me to be in church? Well, I know some people that have made the choice, you know what, my family will survive. They'll survive. We may eat food that's not good for us, and we may not have much stuff, but we're going to be in church on Sundays, and we're going to worship. Okay? That's not a right or wrong. That's the choice they made. I know other people have said, you know what? I want my family to be in church, and I want my family to be able to worship, but it's more important to me that my family has good food to eat, they're healthy food, they're well cared for, they're able to get to doctor visits. Like, I want to provide for my family. That's the right thing to do, and they make a choice in that direction. Now, I use this example because I've been on both sides. There's a season of my life where I worked every weekend and I never got to be in church, but my family was taken care of. I'm in a season right now where I'm able to be in church on Sundays and I'm still able to take care of my family. But I could probably give them more stuff if I worked weekends again. To be honest, I could. So this is a gray area. This is a place where there isn't a line a choice you can make that's going to be absolutely right or absolutely wrong. You have to make a choice because of the variables in life. Our choice is what makes that happen. In recovery, I remember when I first started out in recovery, part of my sobriety plan was there was a period in my recovery where I was in 2 meetings every week. 2 meetings every week, without fail. I think I can count on one hand in a 5-year window how many times I missed a meeting. I was always there. And those were normally if I was out of town for holidays. Maybe both hands. I was always there. Now I attend 1 meeting a week. It's not that I have stopped my recovery, but there's been a change, and I've had to make a different choice. And the gray area is not that I can just decide not to work my program, but that I have to make a choice, and my choice is what determines where I'm going to be. You're welcome. You're welcome, Paris. Why all this talk about gray areas? Well, here's the deal. Gray areas are there and they're real, but they have a huge potential that has to be looked out for because of the fact that our choice is so huge in the gray areas. There is risk involved, and there's some principles that I think really do come into play when we're having to deal with a gray area. Here's another example of a gray area. I live on a road. My house, I don't live on a road, I live in a house, okay. But my house is next to a road. And it is technically considered a 2-lane road. Now, it's a country road, so if nobody's on the road, you drive down the middle. If somebody starts coming, then you go off to the side. But it's a 2-lane road. You have maybe 10 feet that you can move back and forth. You're in a 10-foot wide window. That's how much flexibility you have. That's how big the gray area is. It's actually a pretty small gray area. It's a pretty small area that you have to decide what to do with. But just down the road, there's a highway, there's a freeway. And a few miles down that freeway, it's a 3-lane freeway. There's a shoulder on both sides and 3 lanes of traffic. That's a much larger gray area. There's a lot more decisions I have to make about where I'm going to be on that road. There's a lot more flexibility, and there's a lot more risk. So what do we do with these gray areas? What do we do with the gray areas in faith, and what do we do with the gray areas in recovery? So here's some principles. Here's some things to keep in mind when making decisions, when addressing an area of my life where it's gray. Maybe another way to look is to say, what is a not gray area? Well, the Bible says, thou shalt not murder. You say, well, what about if someone's coming in and they're attacking you? Well, that's not murder. That's not the definition of murder. But when something is actually murder, it's completely forbidden. You're not allowed to do that. That's not a gray area. You don't get to say, well, in this instance, in this certain instance in my life, murder is just the right thing to do. No, you don't. Now, you can quibble about what murder is, but once you define it as murder, you can't do it. That's wrong. In recovery, to engage in a behavior or a substance that is destructive for the purpose of pleasure and pleasure alone, and to do so in a way that takes away from me my humanity, that's wrong. You can't do that and still say you're following recovery. You can't do that and say I'm still working my program. No, you're not working your program. You've taken a break from your program. But there's a lot of other things that are gray. So here's some principles. First of all, identify the things that are not in the gray area. There are boundaries somewhere. Doesn't matter how huge that road is. You know, I have been in other countries. I have visited other countries where the roads were even more expansive than the ones that are just down the street from my house. You know, you drive in Chicago, there's 5 lanes and a shoulder. But somewhere there is a boundary. And one of the important things, what happens sometimes when we move in these gray areas is we get the sense of everything's up for grabs. Anything is open to choice. Anything would be okay. No. First thing we need to do is to identify where are the absolutes. What are the absolutes? Get that nailed down. Because they're there somewhere. Another thing that's important is to find someone who has been down this road before me. I'm not the first person to be in recovery. I'm not the first person to be in recovery from sexual addiction. I'm not the first person to be a Christian. Other people have walked this path before me. Other people have wrestled with these same issues, these same gray areas. Other people have had to make these same decisions. There is no situation that anyone I'm talking to on this video right now or that's going to see it in the future, there's no situation that someone else hasn't had something like that in their life. Someone else hasn't had something like it in their experience, in their faith walk, in their recovery. Someone else has always already been there. Our job is to find them. To think that we are the first person to ever deal with whatever it is we're dealing with is ignorant and arrogant. We are not the first people to wrestle with these things. Someone else has been there. So, find the boundaries that are absolute and find someone that's been there already. Access their wisdom. Ask them questions. Be humble enough to invite their input. Third thing, don't move a boundary. Don't decide something is a gray area. Don't decide something is up for grabs without understanding what the outcome is going to be. In recovery, we call this playing the tape through. If there's a certain thing I'm going to decide, this is a gray area in my recovery, I think I can make whatever choice I want. Play the tape through. What's going to happen if I do this? What will I have to let go of in order to pick this up? What will it cost me to make this decision? In our faith, if there's a certain behavior that we're going to let go of, understand, what am I going to put in place of this? What am I going to replace this with? What am I going to put in my life instead of this? So, for example, during the period of my life where I never got to go to church, there were certain disciplines I had in place. I couldn't be in church, but I could do this. Maybe there's a decision we have to make, and it's in a gray area, and we realize that maybe I would like to be over here making this decision, but I have to make this one over here. What am I going to do instead to satisfy this need in my life? So, identify the absolutes, talk to someone who's been there before, and recognize the consequences of whatever it is I'm doing. And I think maybe the last thing that I would say is that when we have these gray areas, reserve the right to learn from a mistake. If we're going in a gray area and we do something and we're like, you know what? That was the wrong choice. Don't buy into the idea that, well, once I've made this choice, I've got to stick it out. Don't think that somehow we're saving face or we're proving something by continuing on in a decision that we don't think is good anymore, just because if we back up and say we made a mistake, somehow it costs us. No. It costs us to keep doing the thing. Backing up and saying I made a mistake, that's actually the best, that's the best thing we can do, is to recognize this is a gray area. I'm out here trying to find a path. I'm out here trying to make a choice. I'm out here trying to reckon with the changes that happen in my life and in my recovery. And I made a decision to go down this path, to work at this place, to stop going to this meeting, to start going to this other meeting, to choose this sponsor, to choose this church, to read this book, to follow this teacher, whatever it is. I made this choice in this gray area, and this is turning out to not be a good choice. Instead of saying, well, I'm committed to it, and if I back up and say that I made the wrong choice, then people are going to think bad of me, or I'm going to lose confidence in myself. Recognize that that's part of the process. Learning from the mistakes we make in the gray areas is part of the process. It's how we learn. It's how we train. It's how we get better at making a better choice in the next gray area that we face. Gray areas are a part of recovery. Gray areas are a part of faith. There are some things that are absolute, but there's a lot of things that aren't. We need to reserve the right. We need to reserve the option of learning from our mistakes, of growing. We know that we can grow. We can make a different choice tomorrow. We can make a different choice next week. We can make a different choice the next time that person comes, or the next week that meeting rolls around. We can make a different choice. It doesn't have to stay the way it is forever and ever and always. I think one of the reasons, and I'm kind of wrapping this up, but I think that one of the reasons why gray areas are such a, why I get kind of passionate about this is because I think for a lot of my, the early years of my recovery, I was scared of the gray areas. And so there were things that I could have probably taken more personal responsibility for choice-wise. I just abdicated them. And I would say things like, well, my sponsor says this, or the program says that, or I have to be there, or if I don't do this, then I'll lose my recovery, or whatever. And some of that was true for a while. But there came a point where it was really just me not wanting to take the responsibility of owning my own choices in those areas. I think that for some of us in our faith, in our walk with God, and in our recoveries, we may get stuck in an infant stage. We may get stuck in a child stage because we're not willing to recognize the responsibility of owning the gray areas. We want to keep it black and white. You know, the world's very black and white to a 2-year-old, to a 5-year-old, to a 7-year-old, to a 10-year-old. It's very black and white. It's very left and right. It's very up or down, good or bad. And that's okay. I'm not saying that that's not a legitimate stage of development, but there comes a point where we grow up and we take responsibility for our actions and for our outcomes. And we recognize that so much of what is going to be is based off of our choices, not based off of somebody else's rules. And in taking responsibility for that, there is great risk, but there is great potential. There's great potential. There's a lot to be gained from being willing to make choices. So, for example, I do teaching now. That was a gray area for a while. It still kind of is. There's no one hitting me with a big stick saying, Brian, you have to do teaching. And yet I've chosen that this is a path I'm going to pursue. This is a calling that I'm going to answer. This is something I'm going to do. And there is risk there. There's risk. I'm not working in an institution. I'm not working as a minister with some kind of an oversight over me like a board. I'm under spiritual authority, but I'm not in a position that defines my actions. But the potential that is there to be able to reach and touch and do and grow is enormous. The same is true in our recoveries. There is a time when we just do it by the book. We just do what we're told. But there comes a point in our recoveries where we start to actually own my choices define my recovery. And in that moment, where there's great risk of crashing and burning, but there's also great opportunity, great potential to grow as we never have before. In our faith, there is a time when we're just taught line upon line, precept upon precept. We're just given the basics. We're just told what to believe, and we believe it. And that's okay, but there comes a point where we take it on ourselves to say, what do I believe? What do I find in the scriptures? What have I learned from the teachings of those who have gone before? And even though there is risk there of believing or understanding something incorrectly, there's a huge opportunity to learn and to grow and to even contribute back to the body of knowledge, to the learning and furtherment of other people. So gray areas, they come about because of the flexing and the moving and the changing of life. There's huge risk that's there, but there's also huge potential for growth and benefit. And we have to make choices in those gray areas. And how to do that is what I've tried to talk about this evening. Find the boundaries, the real boundaries. Play the tape through, understand what's going to happen if I do these things. Talk to somebody who's been there before, and then recognize that I can always back up and try a different direction. It doesn't have to stay that way. Thank all of you for being here. Thank you so much for sharing this time with me. Paris, very good to hear from you. Thank you for your comments. I look forward to seeing you all next week, and I love you all very much.